no, Ingrid's not here, but we are live. So thank you, Lina, for joining us. And Ingrid will be joining us very soon, we hope. If you could first just introduce yourself, tell everyone your name and your title and sort of a little short description of what you do. Sure.
So I am Lina Srivastava. I think my claim to fame is that I'm number 6 on the She Does podcast list. I'm a social innovation strategist. I'm a producer, I'm a strategist, I'm a designer, former lawyer, recovering, and I also teach at SVA in their Design for Social Innovation master's program. So that's sort of in a capsule who I am. And in relation to why you interviewed me, I do a lot of engagement work around looking at how you use media for social impact. So we do narrative design for impact organizations and impact media projects. Awesome. So when I interviewed you in October, which was a while ago now, considering it's April, you hadn't published the impact report for Who is Dayani Cristal at that point, and you're working on a couple new projects. Could you just update us on where you are? Sure. So I think we talked quite a bit about Who is Dayani Cristal, which is just still, I think, one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on. We published an impact report in February. We're wrapping the campaign up pretty much right now. But we published an impact report, and then we got the Social Impact Media Award, which you noted in the podcast, which was really, that was really great. But we've been talking to people on the ground. We're going to be sort of, submitting our last grant report and such. So there's a little bit of a bittersweet melancholy feeling to this because it's been so much a part of our lives for such a long time, and I think we've seen real impact come out of it. And the good news is that we're going to have continuity because I'm going to be working, hopefully Mark and I are still continuing with Colibri, which is the nonprofit that formed during the impact campaign from Robin Reinecke, who was in the film. So it's really good work. It's unfortunate that we have to do this work, obviously, but I think it's a really good project in terms of being a case study. Awesome. And with Priya Shakti, can you update us on that? Sure. So Priya Shakti is, I don't remember if we talked about it during the podcast, but it's an augmented reality comic book that is aimed at gender-based violence in India, and sort of the story arose from the 2012 rape in New Delhi. And there's Ingrid. Hi.
I'm so sorry, everyone.
It's okay. You're only running a part of a festival.
It's very close to the festival. I'm so sorry.
I like it. I think it's actually very fitting that you're a little bit late because it shows how busy you are.
And you're kind of here at the right time because we just started talking about Priya Shakti. Now I just want to say that Ingrid is not only this sort of digital storytelling maven and one of my dear, dear friends, she's also my program officer.
Oh, thanks.
I know. So I am a 3-time grantee because of you. 3-time Tribeca grantee.
Yeah.
With Dayani Cristal, Priya Shakti, and then Tribeca All Access, which I know is not exactly you, but still, I consider it.
No, it's part of my program.
Great.
Yeah. I know, and I'm so excited. It's great that there's 3 very different projects as well. Shows the full range.
Different modalities, different human rights issues, different. Yeah. I'm a case study in myself, Elaine.
Yeah. How did you two meet, or when did you first meet?
I evicted her.
What?
She evicted me from my office.
Really? What do you mean?
So I was, this was a long time ago. This was 2006, was it? I think 2006. I was the interim executive director for AIVF, the Association of Independent Video Filmmakers, and they had been renting office space, and they sort of brought me in to help either save it or shut it down, and we ended up shutting it down. And one of the first things that we did is evict all the tenants.
One of which was me.
Yeah.
I'm so random.
I know, it is rather random, but somehow we managed to become friends after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Ingrid, we were just talking about sort of related to Storyscapes, because I do want you to get everyone pumped up and excited about what's to come with TFI Interactive and Storyscapes and all the work you've done there. But there's also, separate from Storyscapes, it's called, what's it called? The Playground? No, that's not right. The Sandbox?
The Playground?
The Interactive Playground.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is that, and what role will Priya Shakti have in that?
So the interactive playground is so TFI Interactive is this big conference we do every year during the festival, and it actually started as we do a retreat every year for our grantees, where we sort of take them through their projects and bring in mentors. And the first year we did it, we thought, this is all so private, and only the 4 to 8 grantees we have a year will be part of this. Wouldn't it be nice to do something that everyone can experience, so that we can share some of this knowledge and some of the excitement around these projects? So back in the day, we called it Public Day. It had this really sexy title, Public Day, and that first Public Day became TFI Interactive, and now it's turned into this sort of beast, where we have speakers, including our grantees, but also people from journalism, interactive journalism, gaming, activism, people teaching kids how to code. It's really broad digital culture. And Opiyemi Olukemi, my colleague, started building out this playground because she wanted to not just talk about work but show it, and so we did the biggest one last year, and now we're coming back with an even bigger one in our new venue, Spring Studios, which is the new festival hub. And Priya Shakti is actually going to be part of that with decals on the wall that you'll be able to actually activate with Blipper, with the app.
Cool.
Yeah, it'll be really exciting. So it's really nice to have that space alongside the speakers, and also because we try and make it not feel like a conference. Like, it's not a fixed conference where you come in the morning and you sit down and you just stay there. People tend to move in and out. We have food trucks. We really try and make it be a bit more of a kind of celebration of storytelling, digital culture, and all these amazing people that we're supporting through TFI.
Okay, cool. I have questions, but we are getting questions from the sides of the Q&A, so I do want to ask those as they come in. And for those of you who are watching, make sure to designate who you want to answer this question, or it could be both Lina and Ingrid. The first one is, I'm going to guess this is for you, Ingrid, but I could be wrong, and maybe you both can come in on it. As projects you are involved in over time evolve, how does your participation, mentoring evolve with them? So I'm guessing that probably maybe that is for you, Lina, in terms of the projects evolving and how you mentor and participate in those over time.
Sure. I don't mentor projects as much as I produce them, so I'm usually pretty involved. They evolve over time in response to the way we do is it evolves in time over the social issues that are underlying, like what are our goals, what we're trying to do with the community. So that's how it evolves, and my participation evolves based on things like funding flows, based on sort of needs of movements that we're trying to connect to, where it is in the cycle. Like, there are times when I'll come in and come out of a project depending on where it is. I usually am not involved if we're talking about the media itself, like the film, like the like the comic book, Priya Shakti. I didn't produce. I edited sort of some of the writing of it to make sure that it had a feminist social issue kind of lens on it, but I didn't create, I didn't do any of the drawing or things like that. So I come in and out depending on what the needs are. For projects that I mentor, it's really, those are fewer in between. I come in just as needed on a schedule with people to say, I need your help, I need to answer a question. Yeah.
We try to build in mentorship into the programs as much as we can. It's always really hard because it's difficult because each project is so different. I mean, they're on different platforms, they have different needs, and making sure that we are creating the right kind of scaffolding for each project we've found has to be very bespoke to the individual projects. But one of the things we do is Google Hangouts, where we make sure that the grantees meet each other, because we've realized that actually, and I mean, and Elaine, you've done this, that you are the ones creating the projects, and you are the ones that have the most knowledge of those projects. And what it takes to make a project, from finding great developers to user experience design to distribution to marketing. I mean, all these things that you have to think about at different stages to impact. And so, you know, we do grantee retreats where we bring all of our grantees together with mentors over a weekend. But I feel like the peer-to-peer support and networks that we've created, which can be as simple as, you know, a Facebook group or, you know, some of the other things we do, bringing people to the festival, is vital. And I think one of the other reasons it's vital is because you just need a community of support, and the interactive community is still quite small. So making sure that people meet face to face and know who they can sort of like lean on for different kinds of things, I think is really important. Like, I feel like that kind of field building is as much of what we're here to do as TFI as individual support to individual projects.
Right, and I think that's really important to anyone who's watching that's watching because they're making an interactive project. And I get a lot of emails from people that they feel kind of alone in the whole process, and there's just so many people that don't know where to start. But I think reaching out to someone who's done it before or trying to be part of those discussions is the best way, because there's no point in you trying to reinvent the whole process when there is one that exists.
Let me just say something, because I think that's a good springing off point, because I think I think TFI has done this really beautifully, and there are other people, but there is a real need to create community around interacting what we think is impact. I think the social impact field, whatever realm that's in, whether that's rights or development or whatever, those are that's a much more robust field, and it's a lot easier to go out and find people who can help advise on those things. I mean, that's a lot of what I do. So when I'm involved in projects, we're plugging into existing networks, we're plugging into existing movements, because the work exists, right? And we know, and so I think it's really important to know your subject. It's important to know the networks that exist. And that just brings up one point I wanted to say. I love your podcast. Elaine, it's amazing. Oh my God, it's great. And I think that's capacity building in and of itself.
Totally. I totally agree.
Amazing. One thing that I wanted to say about my podcast is that I just wanted to make sure that it didn't sound like I'm doing all this work alone. Like it was like I was doing this. This is all teamwork. It is all teamwork. You cannot do this work alone, and I've never done this work alone. There's so many amazing, robust teams that I work with and networks that I plug into. And that's I think that is a really important point. Interactive content is interactively produced.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. And that's absolutely true. To go on that whole idea of creating community, there's a question about someone who's working on a documentary film. Her name's Lindsay Jacobson. She's working on a documentary film project that shows videos on a web page as opposed to traditional screening methods. Do you have suggestions on fundraising for this type of project, or have you heard of any other projects? And I would say there's tons of them, and you should check out the DocuBase. But are there any new things we should know about in terms of funding, or new projects you've seen that maybe Lindsay should check out?
Well, I mean, I think the DocuBase, MIT DocuBase, is a really amazing resource, and I definitely feel like you know, one of the first things, and it goes back to what you were saying about, you know, you can go to people whose work you admire and say, you know, how did you do that? You know, what developer did you use? What graphic designer did you use? How did you do the sound? I'm always surprised that people don't do that more in the interactive space, because it's still small enough, and people are so generous with their time and their talent and their skills and knowledge, and I've really found that to be true. So I would say definitely look at the work. You know, you really need to. I remember when I first worked in TV, I was getting interviewed for this job in television, and I told my future boss, that I didn't watch television, and he got so mad, and he was like, well, you have to watch television, you know, you're going into television, watch it. And I think that's true of this interactive space. It's really there is a really amazing body of work out there that could inspire you and give you ideas for what you want to do and also what you don't want to do. So I'd say the first thing is look at it. But the funding, well, that's a whole. I mean, funding is tricky, and I think people should know that going in. Not to say it's impossible, but it is tricky in this space because there aren't that many funders yet. But there are some listed on the TFI Sandbox.
Yeah, and the Sandbox link, if you go to She Does Podcast under Lena's episode, is actually on there for Lindsay, and it lists out fundraisers and other projects, right?
Yeah. It's not just funding. It's also things like markets, like Power to the Pixel, Cross Media Forum at IDFA. You know, places that you can actually take your work and meet people who might fund it. Because I think, you know, that's the other thing, is not to reduce it just to people who are doing the funding, but also markets and festivals and communities that you can tap into that may actually lead you to unexpected sources of funding, because it's not always the obvious, few people who are funding this work. There are lots of niche funders around very particular issues, or angel investors that you would only really get in front of if you get in front of people. And I think that's half the battle, when you're trying to do this, because it's expensive to go to these places. I totally get that, but you kind of have to, you have to get your project out there so that you find the money and the support.
Well, if it's about a social issue, you can go to social issue funders. If you can sort of prove that there's a value to the social issue or the movement or the community that you're working with. So there's that kind of funding. And a lot of the work that I've done has been funded by those. It's TFI and those. So.
Right. But I think that's so important to think laterally about funding.
Yeah.
Because I was just saying this the other day to someone. They were asking for feedback on a project that hadn't received funding from us. And I said, honestly, there was nothing wrong with your proposal. It was really good. You answered all the questions brilliantly. Your treatment was amazing. But we fund 4 to 8 projects a year, and we get hundreds of applications. And statistically, the odds are just not on your side. And it's not a comment on how good your project is. It really isn't. And I know people say that, but it's really true. And it's really important to hear that, because it's not a no from us is not a comment on the quality of the project, and there are other people out there who might be able to fund it. So I know it sounds like a cliche, but it's hard to hear it, and I think it's really true.
It's good for people to hear.
Well, just to say, there's also the Fledgling Fund is getting into this, doing really interesting funding, but they have a list, they have a database of potential people to work with and markets to connect to. RitDoc has a very comprehensive list. And what is that one, Ingrid? Is No Film School or Not a Film School? They have that website that just lists all the deadlines.
Yeah, I think it's No Film School. Yeah.
Yep.
That's a great resource.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, guys. There's 2 more questions. This one's for Lina, and we talked about this, Lina, but I don't know if it made it into the episode. And also, just to note, when you're not talking, I'm gonna mute my mic, and I suggest you guys do that too, so that we can hear the person who's talking. For Lina, do you prefer working with existing documentaries and figure out a way to help the filmmakers create impact, or know the impact you hope to achieve and then create the media, docs, film content to make that happen?
To a certain extent, neither. I like to work with, when I work with a film, I usually tend to work with them ahead of time, meaning they're in production at the moment. So I tend not to work with films that are already produced. There are, rare occasions when I will. I work sort of within what I think is my wheelhouse. I work in human rights and global development. That's sort of what I know, what I've been working on for 15 years, so I understand the realm, I understand the partnerships, I understand all of that. So I tend not to go outside of that. And I know how to ask the questions about what is the desired impact within a community. And that's what I like to lead with. Like, what change do we, multiple stakeholders, what are we trying to aim for? And it has to be narrow, and it has to be specific, and it has to be community-centric. And so that's how I lead with it. So it's sort of, it leads from the impact that we're trying to create, and then that leads into, the reason I say that is because I don't want to necessarily impact the narrative, because that's not my role. I may be a storyteller in my own life, but when I'm working with a storyteller, I like to keep that slightly separate, but help them frame in order to get to a certain issue, to a certain impact.
Perfect. And just to follow up on that, how would one go about to find someone to partner with as an impact producer? Like, what is the characteristics of an impact producer that you're looking for?
Well, besides, you mean me, or? Well,
there's only one of you, so like other people in the field.
Someone else too. Okay, yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so there's a resource as well called the Impact Producers Group that was started by Jennifer MacArthur and Brenda Coughlin. And there's a database of people who do the kind of work that I do in different realms. So there are people who are working on climate change, on sort of race relations, on all these kinds of things, civil rights. And what you want to look for is someone who understands strategy, someone who understands how distribution, not necessarily distribution, but how distribution affects mobilization and coalition building, understands sort of the cultural, the political, and the social context of what you're trying to do, and understands how to make those partnerships, like be that bridge from story to action. So that's what you're looking for.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Ingrid, question for you. What are the current trends in the doc world that TFI is funding that you think have the most legs, such as the future of VR and interactive media and documentaries?
Yeah, I mean, VR is definitely something that everyone's really excited about, and I think justifiably so. I mean, I think that there is something really, amazing about being in this kind of 360-degree space that is challenging and problematic and exciting for filmmakers, because you don't have the frame, the edit's different. All these things that we know as like the film craft are really challenged by VR, and I think that's very exciting. But I definitely think that, well, I mean, who knows? I hate predicting the future, but for me, I like the fact that there's a range. And one of the things that I keep saying over and over again this year about Tribeca, about the festival, is that I'm sort of defining it as spectrum. So this idea that we've got a lot of VR this year, not just stuff that we're doing. The festival's doing a lot of VR, and really amazing VR. And I think VR that will really make filmmakers and creatives and artists think really differently about what you can do with VR, and I'm excited about that. But that doesn't mean that everything needs to be on VR, And I'm sorry it's so loud here. I'm going to try and move into a different room. It's just there's nowhere quiet because everyone's here for the festival. There is literally not a quiet space anywhere in this building.
I love this.
I was hiding in the kitchen earlier trying to have a phone call. All right, I'm going to come in here. So for me, if you look at Storyscapes at the program, we've got personalized storytelling with Do Not Track, which is basically a web series, but it's personalized to you. We've got Karen, which is this creepy life coach app. We've got 2 VR pieces, but then we've also got Door into the Dark, which is a immersive radio piece. Audio piece. And I love that. I love that you've got good old-fashioned audio, beautiful audio, documentary storytelling, alongside some of these newer VR projects. And I think that's important. And I know I'm not the only person to say that, but I love that there's a resurgence in podcasts and audio, and people really paying attention to audio alongside all this VR stuff at the moment, because there's always a bit of a danger. I mean, and part of that's just the news cycle and how these things are written about like hyping something so much that you sort of forget that actually there are these other ways of telling stories, including good old-fashioned linear filmmaking. For me, it's very important to keep all of that. You can hold both things at the same time. You can be excited about VR without throwing away everything that's come before it, and without thinking that VR is the future, the only future.
Cool. Awesome. And in your podcast, you talked about the difficulties with curation and getting women to speak. Can you talk about what the success rate was this year and the speakers that you're excited about this year? I mean, it doesn't have to be.
I'm super excited. I'm excited about every single speaker we have. I'm still really not getting. I'm still not getting the mix right in terms of diversity. I mean, I think I've done better on women, but it's still pretty white group of speakers, and it's something that I think about a lot and really worried about this year. But it's I mean, part of it is because I'm the curator, and I definitely I've talked about this a lot. Like I've really, this year has really made me think a lot about curation and what it means to be a curator, and what it means to program events, and how you make selections, and sort of questioning your own biases, and also just like the people and so I don't think I've been entirely successful. That said, everyone we have is extraordinary, and I think that there's going to be an amazing diversity of ways of thinking about digital culture, which I'm really proud of. But it's definitely something that I worry about, and I talk about very openly, because I think that's the only way we're going to figure this stuff out. I still stand by what I said about women not speaking up, and not accepting that if I tell them that they're a pundit, then they're a pundit. If I invite them to an event to be a keynote, then they are a keynote, and they should say yes, unless they have a really good excuse. But at the same time, it's not. That's not the only reason why there isn't enough diversity in the lineup. A lot of that's on me.
Well, Lina is a good example of someone who talks a lot, you know, and really, you know, your voice is out there and you travel with it. And is there any tips for someone who maybe is afraid to put their voice out there? I mean, everyone's got perspective to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes both ways, and I think, Ingrid, you sort of identified something. I think as women, we do have to take the responsibility to step up, even if we're afraid. And I think there's a problem that we've got as women. Maybe not the three of us on this call, because we talk a lot, but honestly, but I do think, you know, it's interesting because I actually get invited to speak more in the realms of technology or development or human rights. Like I was in Korea a couple weeks ago to speak on filmmaking and public policy and development. I actually get invited less in the media circles to speak, and it's an interesting kind of thing. So I don't know if it's because we are not necessarily. I still think that we in the media field, to a certain extent, think of us as background. Like we're the ones doing the work, we're the ones producing the work. We're not necessarily the ones pioneering the work. Caitlin Burns, who used to be with Starlight Runner, is now on her own, and I had this long conversation about the fact that transmedia storytelling, that we used to call transmedia storytelling, was pretty fair to women because it was interactive, it's about connection, it's about community, and yet when you look at the pundits, they're still like the men, right? And there's a problem, even for the women that are stepping up. We're not necessarily being acknowledged as the ones who should be. We're not necessarily the quote-unquote pioneers. It's very rare to see that. And that's not true of, again, the three of us. I think we have a good space, so I'm not complaining about me, but I do see that with other women. At the same time, I think that there's a lack of attribution, a lack of acknowledgement, and there's a lack of, because of that, women are still kind of feeling like, God, do I have to keep putting myself out there? Like, how often? And, you know, it's like you can just sit there and you can. I was talking to a friend of mine once, and I sort of rattled off my resume, which I'm not going to do now because it's like so braggy. But I was doing that, and he said, "Oh, well, you obviously haven't proven yourself enough yet." And I was like, "What? Like, you're really going to say that to me?" And like, you look at like certain men who are wonderful men, but I'm just like, my resume beats theirs out of the water, and I have to still prove myself at my age and my like experience level. And Mr. 25-year-old guy doesn't need to, and he's like sitting there keynoting. So that's like so general, and I can't whatever. But I do think we have both ways, and we have to keep stepping up. Like we have to keep pushing those boundaries, and it gets tiring, gets exhausting. But the tip is, you know, whoever you are, the woman producer, the woman designer, whatever, you are completely worth it. Your voice is just as strong as anybody else. Like, exercise it. We want to listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, but I also think that there's a real role for, you know, intelligent and creative curation in this, and I don't just mean, you know, let's have more conferences. In fact, I definitely don't mean that, but like I feel like now more and more there are these spaces that are emerging where you can do really interesting things quite cheaply, bringing communities together, you know, hack spaces, community spaces. Whatever it may be, where you can like try co-working spaces, where you can try different kinds of combinations and bring different communities of people together in interesting ways. And one of the things that, I mean, and this may just be me being really defensive, but actually this is totally me being really, really defensive, but I feel like sometimes some of the criticism I get about stuff that I'm doing is, it's like it's putting a lot of pressure on me and my lens, to do everything right, or to do everything in a way that people feel that they need. And a lot of the time I'm kind of like, well, why don't you start something like that? Because I'm not going to do it. I have a full-time job and I'm too old and too tired. But why don't you do it? Because I feel like more and more now there are ways of doing this work, and I love this idea of like temporary autonomous zones, you know, like these sort of pop-up cultural moments or community moments that you can create in a way with the web that you really couldn't do 15, 20 years ago. And I kind of feel like in this space I wish there was more of that. That's also why I love your podcast, because I think that is part of that. You know, like we had that conversation, Elaine, you know, where you were saying, do you have any recommendations for podcasts with creative women? And I was like, you know, actually no. And you did it. I love that, and I want more of that. But I can't, and I'm not for a minute saying that people think that I should be doing all of this, but sometimes I do get a little bit like, you know, if something's bothering you that much, do something about it. You know, start a podcast, create you know, like I love the Film Fatales and all these like filmmaking groups. You know, create a circle of support. It doesn't have to be you stepping up to give a keynote. Like that's one way of thinking about representing and changing the conversation. There are so many other ways now, and I'm seeing so many like lovely creative things bubbling up. And I think that's really exciting.
Absolutely.
That sounded like a complaint. What I was actually saying is, isn't it really exciting that this is happening now and that you can do this stuff, and you don't need a huge festival budget to do it either.
Right, and my opinion of it is if you're thinking it and you're having this experience with it and you're frustrated with it, there's definitely people out there that feel the same, and it's not going to be too hard to find that audience that will either help you make it, you know, a reality or whatever. But yeah, cool. Well, do you guys have 4 more minutes to make this go to 3:40? Is that okay? Because we have a couple more questions on the side. For Lina, can you talk about the roadmap a person should lay out first starting to talk about the project, and how often you tell your audience about a launch before the set date? I guess best practices of that.
Sure. I mean, I think that depends on the project. So it depends on the sensitivity of the subject as well. Like if you are working on something that is controversial or that requires a level of privacy, security, and safety, you probably want to hold off any kind of announcements on launch. Having said that, it's almost like a pure old marketing kind of construct. You want to get your audience involved and excited. If you want it to be participatory, you have to go earlier because you want to get people primed and you want to give them the guidelines. It's not necessarily a roadmap as much as it is a set of like sort of decisions leading up to something. It's kind of like you have to work backwards from when you think that you're going to be launching. Now sometimes your launch, quote unquote, of your project, whatever piece of your project, is going to be determined by outside contextual factors. Like if you're trying to follow a news cycle, then you're going to have to understand how that works. Like we, you know, for example, with Who is Dayani Cristal, we were sort of in the middle of looking at midterm elections for the immigration reform, and we were working on that when the unaccompanied minors crisis happened, and we had to sort of scramble to figure that out. And honestly, I don't think we responded to it particularly well in terms of being able to engage people in that conversation because we didn't have a community. It's in the impact report about like that particular failure of like a community screening series that could have responded right away. So what we did was we responded by conversation on social media, but we didn't do on the ground stuff. And if we had something set up to be able to respond to those kinds of emergent crises, it would have been, I think, a little bit better. So you want to be able to think about responding to the things that are going to happen. Yeah,
I think that's a great point. And if there's, especially, I mean, when it's something that is not planned for, something like that, where you wouldn't know that's happening, that's one thing. But especially if you can target dates in the future or things that are happening in the future that you can peg your story to or something, and even contribute content to different outlets that will bring people back to contributing or whatever, that's always very helpful.
Yeah.
There's a question about interviewing climate refugees. And I think, I mean, this is a very specific question about finding compelling subjects, but I would like both of you maybe to comment on maybe the role of partnering with nonprofits. I know, Lina, you work a lot with different nonprofits on maybe finding subjects and assisting them and helping to tell stories in a more collaborative way. Can you comment on that?
Sure, and I think actually Ingrid probably has a really interesting lens on this too, so I'll keep this short. But you know, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're working with people. They don't have to be large nonprofits or institutional, multinational kinds of things, but really who is deeply connected with the community that you're working with. If you're talking about climate refugees, you have to be really, really careful about, again, things like anonymity, privacy, security. You want to make sure that their story is being framed in a way that they would, I'm not anti sort of Western filmmaker at all, but you do want to make sure that when you're going that is being elevated most of all, and their needs that are being represented most of all. And you can do that by attaching local partners that you or someone else has helped vet and that the community trusts. You know, and even if they don't necessarily trust, like we were working in Honduras with a community that were like, we're not working with NGOs because they don't understand. And we put them together with an NGO that now they're going to be partnering for the long term, because they were able to sort of go in and say, no, we represent, sort of, we listen to community voice, and there was that conversation that happened. So you have to be really, really careful, but you don't want to go in necessarily saying, and also you have to, I think you as a filmmaker usually filmmakers know how to listen really beautifully, so you want to sit there and become a listener. Right? Even when you don't have a nonprofit, before you've attached a nonprofit, you can still listen, and you can bring that to the nonprofit as well. It becomes a collaboration.
Perfect. Ingrid, do you have anything?
I think that's all right. I think the key. I think listening is it's like the best advice I ever got, and advice I wish I followed more. But I think it's absolutely true that the most successful filmmakers, I think, and storytellers in general, are the ones who are really good at listening, and not co-opting voices. But I think it's also really important to be very clear about what your goals are as a filmmaker, and that can change from project to project. I think more and more we're seeing people piece together very different careers where they work in very different ways on each project, but you have to be very, very clear about what that is, because there are ethical considerations and there are best practices, and they're different, right? A piece that an NGO pays for may be very, very different to a piece that you would make independently, even if you then partnered with an NGO to distribute it or to do some of the outreach work around it. And I don't think that there are any right or wrong answers generally. Well, I think there are a few, but I think generally it's hard to talk in generalizations, but when it comes to a particular project, I think you have to be very, very clear. And if you're partnering with anyone, not just NGOs, you have to be very, very clear about what that partnership involves in terms of things like, final cuts or what it's for, all of these things. And I think that territory is getting more and more murky. And it's just something that you have to wrestle with, because increasingly that's where the funding's coming from, or those are incredible partnerships. It could be brands as well, not just NGOs, by the way. And you have to come up with a strategy really, really early on and work with people who can help you through that territory if you can't. And guys, I'm sorry, I'm just on a live thing. I keep trying to move, but I can't find a room. Sorry. And I think... And I think, and if you don't know how to do that, or you feel like it's not your skill set, hire someone like Lina, because there are people out there who can really help you navigate that territory, and it can be really prickly territory, I think. So I think that's the thing, is ask people if you are not sure, or you feel like it's maybe not the hat that you should be wearing, then surround yourself with the people who can help you.
And just to say, to begin with, we have a rubric that it's called the 3 R's. I hate calling things like that, but it is. It's called respect, resonance, and I just lost it because I wrote it, so I should know my title. But anyway, so it's a rubric I can send it to you, and you can publish it if you want for people, and you can tweet it out. But it's a rubric designed to listen to multiple stakeholders and to communities and make sure. Resonance, that's it. So make sure that it kind of works with community, and that it's an ethical standard, it's an ethics standard. So if you want to, I will tweet it using the hashtag today, and then people can just take a look at it.
Yeah, that would be perfect. Okay, well, I want to be considerate of your guys' time, because I know you're very busy ladies. So thank you guys so much. One final question is, what's each of your all's favorite films? And then tell us what you're excited about right now. Ingrid, give us the dates and times of the events coming up. And Lina, I know you're working on a couple projects that we didn't talk about in the podcast, and then we'll sign off.
Sure. Favorite film. Oh God, that's really hard. It was so hard when I had to answer those questions for the podcast, because it changes all the time, and I'm like.
I love that you're copped out by giving 10 answers.
I know. So anyway, I could do it. There's so many films and books and some things that I love, and Divorce Iranian Style is still one of my favorite documentaries, because I think it really did change how I thought. It changed the way I sort of saw documentaries, and I think that Kim Longinotto is an amazing filmmaker, and she just really inspired me when I started working in television. So I think that I feel like that's one of my favorite documentaries, just because it was such a watershed moment for me in my career. as far as what I'm excited about coming up, I mean, honestly, I cannot think about anything else except for what's happening to me in 5 days' time when the Tribeca Film Festival starts, because I am living, breathing, and eating it right now, 24/7. But I'm really excited about Storyscapes this year. I think it's going to be really interesting. I'm excited about TFI Interactive. Storyscapes is 16 through 19 at Spring Studios. It's open and free to the public. You just need to sign up online for a slot. I'm excited about TFI Interactive. I think we have a really amazing range of speakers this year talking about really different stuff, and I think it's going to be a really fun day. That's Saturday the 18th, all day long. You can buy a spring pass just for that day to come. It's $40, so it's really affordable, and that gets you access to everything that's happening in spring that day. And there's a bunch of other VR things happening. Oculus Story Studio, Jeremy Baylinson's VR lab. Chris Milk's going to be there with some of his work. So I think just that having a hub this year for the first time is going to be really nice, because it's hard to have that in New York. You know, everything's very dispersed and there's a lot going on. So the fact that you can kind of come to Spring Studios this year and hang out and see stuff is going to be really great.
And will there be a hashtag people can follow if they're not in the United States or New York?
Well, for TFI Interactive, the hashtag is TFII.
Cool.
TFII. And for Storyscapes, it's Storyscapes. That's an easy one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Lina?
Sure. I mean, before I answer, I want to give a plug into TFI Interactive and Storyscapes, because it is amazing. And I'm so sad that, I mean, it's for a very good reason, but I'm missing TFI Interactive for the first time ever. But it's because one of my best friends is getting married, and
that's a really good reason.
So I won't be there this year, unfortunately, but I will be in and around quite a bit. So I love those two. I love Storyscapes. I love Interactive. It's wonderful stuff. So if you can go, guys, go. My favorite documentary, I'm going to be totally like, I mean, obviously, I love The Act of Killing. I love Who is Dayani Cristal. I love a lot of social issue documentaries that call to my human rights, like that spirit. And the ones that I've worked on, every single one of them, I'm very proud of, and I love them. I'm going to be contrary and say that my other favorite documentary of the last couple of years is Valentino. God, I love that documentary. It's so well done, and it's so much like a love story and a story about business and how you navigate a changing field. So I love that one. What I'm excited. Go ahead. You're going to say something?
No. Sorry, I was breathing deeply. Sorry.
Sorry. So you didn't like it? No. I love it. I can't wait to see it.
I know. I loved it. Sorry. I do a lot of heavy breathing at the moment. It's just
I know. But you haven't broken down and cried, and I'm very proud of you. So the other things I'm excited about is that Traveling While Black. So we just got the grant from TAA to do Traveling While Black. It's going to be an interactive website. We are doing a VR piece. I hope. We're like prototyping that. I'm really excited about that. It's really about the story, the historical story and the contemporary story, the continuum of how we've been treating African Americans, particularly in that lens of travel and movement and the restrictions on the way we think about the freedom of movement. So that's I'm very excited about. I'm also excited that I'm working with Rockefeller Foundation. They've given me a grant to build out a story platform around transformation through leadership. And that's about legacy work and really who does good work on the ground. Very excited to sort of work on that for the next year. Just excited to see what's going to, I'm just excited about the field in general. I think women have an amazing voice in this field. I love She Does. I love everything that sort of like these evolutions I see. I'm actually excited for the first time in a long time about the role of women and like sort of inclusive voices and just the possibility of civic engagement, digital culture, gender, human rights. There's so much possibility if we just learn how to sort of do it right. So.
Absolutely, yes. Well, thank you guys so much. For the people that are still with us, we have people still with us. Next week on the show, we'll have Hannah Polak. She's a Polish filmmaker who worked on a documentary called Something Better to Come for close to 15 years and has attached sort of a social issue side of it to help the kids that she documented. And then after that, we'll have Linda Pan from Sundance Now Club talking more about business, the business side of media. So thank you, Ingrid and Lina. And if anyone has more questions, you can tweet them at #SheDoesHang, and then we'll pass them along to Ingrid or Lena, or tweet directly to them. So thank you guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.